Hey everybody, I didn't realize we were live, but super excited to be back here with everyone. I hope you enjoyed all the lessons learned from Allison, the panel, then Deanna. It's Deanna, right?
It's Deanna, yeah.
Deanna and Nicole from Project Zebra. And now I've got Jonathan Kempe back with me from Sydney, Australia. And we're thrilled to be joined by Deanna to talk about more of the power of outside-in processes. So welcome to the digital stage.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So for anybody that just missed your presentation, give them an idea of who you are and what you do.
Okay, great. So my name is Xena Denton. I work at Corning, and in that role, I'm an IT director for global supply management.
Oh.
So, my job is to partner with the business as an IT representative to help them optimize outcomes through their investment in technology portfolio. And I focus and support a lot of our leaders that focus on planning, which is an area we were talking about just recently in there. And so we have been working with Laura to just figure out, hey, what's the future planning look like? How can we work together to improve outcomes and performance in that area? And so I'm excited to be here to talk about just some of the research we're doing and what we're finding out, how we're evolving our capabilities.
Yeah, so excited. Jonathan, I want to welcome you here. I know I mentioned you earlier, but want to say a quick hi.
Hi.
Do you want to jump in here? Because I know you were watching the presentation and probably just itching to ask some questions.
I was watching, and I mean, my first thing to say is tip of the hat to Corning, especially from us over here in Australia. Lots of harsh conditions we've got to endure. The very things that we use day to day, transformational from your company, from mobile phones through to microwaves and other bits and pieces. You are quite literally the covert operators behind the scenes making the world work. So great company and a very heavy and very admirable history in innovation. I noticed you had a really great turn of phrase there. You said, as we work through these processes, we're maturing and evolving into them, and we're trying as hard as we can. I think you said to be grown-ups as we learn our way through these processes. It's a really great turn of phrase. And I know you weren't saying that at all to be disparaging, but it's one of those things that as you work through something complex, you do have to learn your way through it. So I was really appreciative of your perspective.
Thank you. No, Laura, she reinforces that we have to be able to learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that's a humbling challenge, right? To put in front of someone and say, you think you know everything, you think you're an adult, but we're all children again. It's this continuous cycle to say, today I have to relearn what I thought I knew.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to give a quick shout out to the audience and let you know that Deanna is only with us for the next 11 minutes. So if you have any questions for her, make sure you put them in the chat, because after that, we're going to go to trivia, and we've got to announce the winner of trivia round number 1. So the first question that I have for you is, what's your definition of the outside-in process, and what sort of power does it hold in supply chain?
Well, my definition is actually challenging ourselves to look at other intel, market intel, and outside information that's outside of our 4 walls, right?
Yeah.
We tend to assume that everything can be predicted and forecasted from our own orders and sales history. And I think that I agree with Laura, there's a lot that cannot be forecasted with that alone, right? Mm-hmm. We have to supplement that and draw correlations between this happened on this day, you had a spike or you had a contraction, and what happened to be true at the same time was this weather pattern or this COVID event or this type of market event. And then we start to discern brand new patterns because we've overlaid outside information, right? And it's going to give us a lot more clarity, a lot more forecastability, a lot more consistency of just, forecasting what's going to happen and being prepared for that deviation.
Absolutely. Jonathan, I know you got some questions over there.
Yeah, I have lots of questions.
I knew it.
I can just only imagine as you go through this process that it's quite a shift, because inside a business, you think, well, inside we know what we're doing. And outside, those pesky customers, what would they know? They make our job so complicated. But when you do an outside-in process, you're kind of forcing yourself into that position of considering a whole bunch of external factors. Did you find that some people would naturally fall into a rhythm of understanding how these outside-in processes work, and other people found them a little bit more complicated to work their way through?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think some folks, it depends on if they've had outside industry experience in, let's say, consumer products, right? They know that a lot of things are streaming live and happening. They've heard of the social listening, right? And things that go viral, whether it's Rihanna's makeup or something, her specific color she highlights, and just things that go viral out of nowhere, right? So, some folks that maybe they've been in one dimension of an industry for a long time, but if they've come with a lot of different background, I have noticed different folks approach it different ways. And some people really believe in the value, and the differentiation of outside versus just trying to tell the story, the whole story from inside only.
Absolutely. So can you explain why there's more value in using market signals?
So I think it's more, we're proving this is a mathematical outcome, like Nicole was saying, like the data scientists and some of the technologies that we work with, they're actually proving that, hey, when they overlay that into the model, that outside information actually gave them a lot more forecastability. That he had a big jump from 8 to 17%. So
big jump too,
that's a
right?
huge jump.
Yeah.
So, like we've been talking about, you just follow the data, right? So if the data is showing a quantified, verifiable increase, we have to believe the data, right? And we weren't getting that increase. We weren't getting that performance with only a sub data set that was inside of our four walls in her situation. And then she wasn't getting the insight that certain branches were unforecastable, right? From her inside only data. So that's the differentiation with outside data. I think it's really important. And I've seen this, years back, like Home Depot. I had listened to someone from Home Depot give a presentation about just outside in data, their patterns and how they use that information to figure out, hey, do I start stocking bottled water and 4x8 plywood sheets in a hurricane? Right. Nobody's going to sit at home and paint, okay? But they're going to get a new generator. They're going to go get 4x8 sheets, and they're going to get bottled water without power. So, this has kind of been lingering out there for certain industries that they knew that they needed external data to pivot quickly to a new sales position and procurement position based on weather patterns. Just as an example.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been hearing about that too in the transportation side of things, right? What is it going to delay?
Yep.
And how does that impact everything after that delay? And who do we need to tell that this is going to be delayed? There's trucking companies, there's logistics companies, there's ports, there's your customer that needs to be informed that your product's on its way, but it's going to be delayed because of weather.
Exactly. And to those transportation delays, I have friends that are planning projects casually. We have this expectation that, just because you feel like there's going to be 30 windows for you for your window project, that doesn't mean they're going to be there, because if you don't really get up to speed on the latest lead time and know that those windows might be coming from China and now it's 8 months, right? That's not going to be a winter project. That's going to be a spring or summer project. So just getting people used to really not assuming that everything is readily available at the time that you want it, and just living with the reality that we're dealing with.
Jonathan?
Yeah, you also mentioned, it was a great phrase you used, that the area that we're looking at, or the areas we're covering in this conference, are underrated in their complexity. In your experience and in your context, how do you approach it in terms of making it simple enough for people to grasp the concept so they can turn that theory that you're working through into practice? Is there any tips you can give on simplifying the process so people understand?
So that's a great question. And I think that we've simplified it by that one slide that Laura showed, where she shows you, listening on one side, market indicator, market research. And I think the best way to teach people is to show them that slide and then give them 3 to 4 to 5 examples to say, for this particular lever, trade, right? Like one day you might actually have a slump in revenue because you can't sell to that that area of the world anymore, or you can't buy from that area of the world anymore. So you go through and you give specific examples as to why each one of these levers could be a contraction or an expansion, right? And there's just an example, is like they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words, but a really good example that brings it home of each of those dimensions on that slide that Laura shared. Of all the outside indicators, that's the best way to learn. Unfortunately, we can't take it from 25 or 30 little icons on that slide down to 2. The world's just not simple. It's funny. I used to, I had a complex client. They built submarines and aircraft carriers, and there was a joke in the room that said, "Hey, this is just too complicated building, nuclear powered aircraft carriers. Can you just explain it to me like a 4th grader?" And the response from the engineer is like, "Nope, that's not going to happen," right?
That's right.
So you have to deal with the complexity that we've been dealt. So
Not when you're dealing with that kind of power.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's a nuclear power. It's just like a really fancy yacht. You're like, no, it's actually not. It's got lots of, there's 5,000 people who live on that thing. Yeah, it's actually quite complicated.
Yeah.
So. Did you have another question before? Because I've got a wrap-up question, but if you have any more, now's your time.
Oh, I have lots of questions.
I know you do.
But in terms of calling specific example with the river of demand, which of the elements have you found particularly helpful? If you could isolate one of them, there's lots of different things you've covered. Which one has been the biggest? Maybe it's a lever there. Which one has been the biggest change agent for you and helped you go through into the solution process, the easiest or the quickest?
One of the things I think that really, opens up our mind about the rivers of demand is not just the main, parts of the river, but all the little small tributaries. People tend to design a habitat and say, hey, this is the exact use case and scenario and customer and SKU that I think was going to happen. And then they're not thinking through, hey, I better have a contingency plan. What are all these little tiny tributaries that are coming in that are actually aggregating up to be a significant amount of demand that we didn't have in our line of sight? Right. So I love the way it comes together where you might have just a big rushing giant river in the middle, but all of these other little tributaries. So it begs the question, let's at least have that conversation. So we're not leaving money on the table and opportunity on the table.
Well, and I think it talks to, and I always say collaboration is the future of business. I always have a sign behind me as a reminder to the community, right? But it speaks to collaboration internally and who is actually, getting hurt, like hindered or happy, depending on how you look at it internally. And then this outside in, right? Collaborating outside of your external partners and suppliers and et cetera, et cetera. And it really brings home how important it is to collaborate internally and then externally and then bring it all together.
Yeah, it's funny because, I've worked with large Fortune 500 companies for over 30 years. But then sometimes I have these conversations with just small independents. And I give an example to a lot of the folks in supply chain to say, don't tell me it can't be done, right? Because I've talked to guys that have small farms and they have a river of demand. They expect to sell a bunch of their product, let's say on a Saturday at a farmer's market. But they understand that if all of that volume doesn't come through that one river, the tributaries, they'll say, hey, well, those ramps or those onions didn't sell on Saturday, but by Monday, those onions became pesto, right? And then by Wednesday, they became pickled onions or pickled ramps, right? So they actually have an alternative channel that they monetize that. They didn't let it go to waste, right? So they figured out what their runoff, their smaller streams were in addition to the big stream, and they're not just designing their life down one heavy path, right? And I think that's our responsibility, right, in terms of those who are, responsible for P&L and outcomes, right, is to just make sure that we're looking at that whole river of demand and holistically and optimizing it.
So for the audience, before you leave us, what's one thing that you want them to leave here thinking about, either your presentation or this conversation today? We always ask for a takeaway, either for them to think about, put into action, and something tangible that they can really do right away.
I think something tangible is to challenge your thinking to say, hey, it is time to pivot. This is, I think one of the things Laura and I talked about in this space on outside in thinking is that similar to the automotive pivot from gasoline cars to electric vehicles, it's not incremental. It's not going from a 5-speed to an automatic. It's literally going from a gasoline vehicle to a electric vehicle with this kind of pivot in planning to go from inside to outside. And so what that means is there's going to be a lot of obsolescence around us, whether it's obsolescence like in the car example of gas stations. You don't need oil changes anymore, right? But you do need to understand where charging stations are. You do know that the trunk might be in the front and not in the back. And so challenge yourself to understand in the future, what does that mean by planning? What are it going to be? How's it going to affect jobs? How is it going to affect, what parts of data you do? You don't consolidate it and you clean it. You actually read the insights and you actually figure out what you shouldn't touch and what you should touch. If it's non-forecastable, don't waste a lot of time. Keep it moving, right? So that's the thing that I would say, really get ready for change and understand that there are these monumental pivots, right, in a lot of different areas of our life. Planning is one of them, just like vehicles have been.
Thank you for saying that. And just to put that into context, I was talking to my family in the UK, and they said that their friend with an electric vehicle, it took them 10 hours back to Scotland. I don't know what the regular time is, but apparently he had to stop like three times to charge the car. Aww. And it took like a really long time to charge the car every time he stopped. So it took a long time to get there. And so,
but he saved the planet on the way, Sarah. He was saving the planet with every mile that he went.
Exactly. We have to reinforce that.
We absolutely do. Well, Dean, That was amazing. Really appreciate you running over here after you left the stage of your presentation.
My pleasure.
Because I was so glad that we could capture that conversation.
Me too. Me too. It's always a pleasure to talk about this stuff. I think we're all learning, we're all evolving, and we got to crawl, walk, run together.
Yeah, and we need to do it together,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Supply chain community, supply chain leaders together.
Absolutely.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you so much.
Thank
Have a
you.
good rest of the conference.
Thanks, Tina.
Bye-bye.
All right. Well, that was amazing. Jonathan, what did you learn?
Yeah, well, I think it's so great that in this conference you have business leaders who come from all different walks of life. I love it when someone jumps on stage, and we just heard earlier from Laura from LKQ over in Europe. They're automotive parts, a whole different ecosystem, 1.4 million SKUs, I think they said. Wow. And she's got to manage that entire process without their heads spinning off. And they've got to work through the way they currently do things, and then look to the future of how they could do things, and work into these different factors that come along seemingly out of the blue or built up over time, things like inflation, which massively disrupt an operation, and then build processes to fix those things. And so what you're hearing in this conference, a lot of quality insights from real companies that have had to struggle with a whole bunch of practical realities. And what are they doing? Transforming what they're doing using outside-in processes, looking at their rivers of demand and the tributaries that come into them, and actually adjusting things in a heavily practical sense. And I think if there's something that I observed as I watched on from outside, is that all of the things that are being covered are practical. You can take away that theory and immediately, turn from the screen, turn to your production manager and say, hang on, how are we actually measuring that? How are we changing that? Right. So I've learned a whole bunch of different things, in particular from the speakers, but also from the conversations that surround the event. I found it really, really insightful and valuable.
Absolutely. And I want to give a shout out to Michael, who said it's been highly impactful so far.